Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Andrew Gray, and I'd like to welcome you to this Fusion21 webinar. Many of you will have joined us before, and no doubt you would have enjoyed our COVID-19, the recovery series, and also reimagining the future. Today is the first in a series of webinars that will focus on aspects of building safety and compliance, with a particular focus today, as you'll know, on the importance of firefighting lifts in our tall buildings and those buildings housing our most vulnerable people. Firstly, just a little piece of housekeeping. If you're not familiar with or new to Fusion21 webinars, you will see a control panel on the right hand side of your screen. If you click the orange arrow, you can reduce the size of the panel and you can then see more of the screen. If you are having difficulties in hearing us, you should be able to adjust the audio settings there. If you're still not able to hear us, then the age-old log in, log out often works. But also, I have a couple of colleagues, if you are really desperate, who will be able to get hold of you if you post a question in the answer box. And coming on to that, we do want to very much hear from you and to make these sessions as interactive as possible. And whilst you are on mute, please do use the question panel to answer any questions that you have during the course of this webinar. So at any time, do feel free to post your questions to the panel. We'll keep an eye on them and make sure that they're all answered. If we have an exceptional volume and we've got a really good audience this afternoon, we'll come back to you with the answers in due course. So moving on, just a little introduction from me. Obviously, recent fire tragedies have highlighted the need to have proper procedures in place in the event of fire, and it's particularly true in high-rise buildings, which pose unique risks to occupants who may be confused about the exact location of emergency exits or what they can do in the event of a fire. The Building Safety Bill and the Fire Safety Bill provides a foundation for secondary legislation to take forward the recommendations from the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1, which stated that building owners and managers of high-rise and multi-occupied residential buildings should be responsible for a number of areas, including regular inspections of lists and the reporting of results to the local fire and rescue services, for ensuring evacuation plans are reviewed and regularly updated, and personal evacuation plans are in place for residents whose ability to evacuate may be compromised, for ensuring fire safety instructions are provided to all residents in the form that they can reasonably be expected to understand, and ensuring that individual flat entrance doors where external walls of the building have unsafe cladding comply with current standards. The draft regulation stops short of setting out exact requirements for specific firefighting lifts, though it is clear that installation of them would have an impact on improving safety in all our tall buildings and those buildings housing vulnerable people. So this afternoon, we're going to hear from a panel of experts who are going to outline the building safety case and process, how they think firefighting lifts will fit into this or not, what they are, i.e. what a firefighting lift is and what it isn't, why you might consider installing them, and how firefighting lifts can form part of a fire engineering strategy and building safety case. So without further ado, I'm now going to introduce you to our panel, and first to speak is John O'Keefe, who's associate at RPS Consulting. He'll be followed by Jim Scrivens at Lifton Engineering Services. And then finally, Peter Beck, Framework Manager at Fusion21, will say a few words at the end about how you might access these expert services through the Fusion21 framework. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to John, and hopefully I will enable John now to have control of the presentation. But if not, John, just tell me, shout, and I'll move the presentation forward. So thanks, and over to you, John.
Is this like learning to fly where I say, I have control? Okay.
Hopefully.
Well, hopefully I don't crash and burn. Anyway, thank you, Andrew. And yet, whilst the report does stop short of setting out the exact requirements for firefighting or evacuation lifts, the Hodgetts report does indicate that the lifts are subject to a phase 2 section of an inquiry. As detailed in the shortcomings by Dr. Lane's specific review of the lifts at Grenfell Tower. So I'll hopefully highlight some of those key changes and processes that will be deployed in the medium to longer term that will impact duty holders, building owners, and for those responsible for compliance and safety in buildings, along with the key points to consider in both the new build and the existing building environment. So RPS, who are we? RPS is a multidisciplinary consultancy group, FTSE 500, 4,000 employees across Europe, Asia and USA. The UK lift team is a small part of that 4,000 employees, but we're spread across the geography of the UK. And about me specifically, I've got circa 40 years of experience in the industry. I know I don't look that old. But, I don't think I have control. Slide 2, please.
Oh.
Ooh. Yeah, there you go. So this slide 2 is really about the foreword from the Hodgetts report that indicates the key failures in that review, and it highlights these 4 key elements. So ignorance, what they're saying is that regulations and guidance are not always read by those who need to, and when they do, the guidance is misunderstood or misinterpreted. And in terms of indifference, the primary motivation is to do things as quickly and as cheaply as possible, rather than to deliver quality homes which is safe for people to live in. And when concerns are raised by others, which is residents and tenants and those involved in building work, they're often ignored. Lack of clarity on roles and responsibilities. There's an ambiguity over where responsibility lies, and it's exacerbated by a level of fragmentation within the industry and precluding robust ownership of accountability. Inadequate regulatory oversight. It was found that the size or complexity of a project doesn't seem to inform the way in which it's overseen by the regulator, and where enforcement is necessary, it's often not pursued. And where it is pursued, the penalties are so small as to be an ineffective deterrent. So these issues have helped to create a cultural issue across the sector, which can be described, or is described by Hodgetts as a race to the bottom, caused either through ignorance, indifference, lack of clarity, and inadequate regulatory oversight. The Hodgetts review of the Grenfell Tower tragedy has shown that in too many cases, people who should be accountable for fire safety have failed in their duties. And in the summary and matters for particular concern, as I mentioned earlier, the lifts at Grenfell came under a degree of scrutiny with a recommendation for further review in phase 2 of the inquiry to establish the root cause on where the provision on the lifts had been modernised in 2005 had an impact on the overall outcome of the tragedy. A recommendation from that inquiry was to introduce a managed and accountable process, a systemic approach. They refer to it in that report as the golden thread, connecting all the elements of the management of safety in all buildings, but in particular, the management of high-rise and high-risk buildings. Slide 3, please. So the golden thread. A systemic approach to managing fire and other key safety elements within a building. High-rise, high-risk in general, with a focus on high-rise and high-risk residential buildings. The 4 key roles that are changes to this process is the introduction of the building safety regulator, who's empowered to sanction and review non-compliance And the three main functions are really to oversee the safety and standard of all buildings, directly assure the safety of higher risk buildings, and improve the competence of people responsible for managing and overseeing the builder's work. Now, these guys will have teeth, and they are designated to be part of the HSE. The other three key roles that will be introduced is the accountable person. So that's the duty holder, the building owner, the building safety manager, who will be appointed by the duty holder, and the building inspectors, that they're the people that will be employed and retained by the HSE. The building safety regulator, they will be the ones that will be carrying out periodic checks. One of the key outputs from the Hackett report was really about the lack of compliance to code and standards that says there should be periodic tests and examinations, verification that processes are being followed, that the systems are working correctly, that the lifts are tested to home to ground floor, that the lifts are tested in the use of establishing a bridge control for the firefighters. There was no evidence of that. Slide 4, please. So what are the codes that drive the standards within lift design? There are 3 harmonized European standards in relation to fire and evacuation. There's EN 8173. I'll go through the detail in the next slide by details. There's EN 8172, which is firefighter lifts. So it's a harmonized standard. And EN 8176 is specifically for evacuation lifts. Now this is in draft currently, so there's an improved code of standards that are coming out for evacuation lifts, which are specifically designed for when you develop your building evacuation strategy and you have disabled people and you're complying with the codes to allow full egress and access throughout the building, then your evacuation strategy is key to that, and that's when you decide when to deploy an evacuation lift. So the next slide, please. So this is the basic design for lifts generally. So you may find when you go into a general building that is below 18 meters, that you'll see there'll be a fireman switch above the lift entrance, and that all that does is that just brings the lift down to ground floor, isolates it in the event of a fire. It could be linked to the building BMS or fire control system, where it automatically, in the event of a fire alarm, the lift automatically homes to ground floor and isolates. And that allows the firefighters the comfort to know nobody's trapped in the lift, basically. So the next slide, please. So this slide, so the firefighting lifts. So the key elements in design for firefighting lifts are in both the lift installation itself, but then the building, fabric of the building and environment. And there are 2 key distinctions that will drive that decision-making process on how you would deploy those firefighting lifts. So there are a number of elements that I've identified here in terms of the key building issues to address within the spec. So it's management of water egress into the lift shaft and pits. There's a significant volume of water used in firefighting. So when on a firefighting lift, it has to be able to withstand that volume of water going down the shaft over all of the electrical equipment, the correct IP ratings, the removal of water from the pit, so you're not submerging electrical components within that volume of water. Power supply changeover modules. There has to be a secondary power supply. So it's dual power supply into a firefighting lift with a changeover switch. Protected safe areas, lobbies in front of lift entrances. So compartmentation, a key element to the design of the building, and smoke control through pressurization or ventilation. Next slide, please. So by comparison, the simpler part of the process is the lift design. So it's a self-contained design, and it's around the dimensions of the lift car, the power supply and changeover modules. Fireman's control, Jim and I were speaking earlier while we were pulling the presentations together, and there's a peekaboo system that they have on the doors. So in Grenfell, in the report, there's a particular harrowing section where the firefighters were in the lifts that weren't designed for firefighting, where the lift doors opened onto a onto a floor that was full of smoke and flames, but the doors opened at full speed automatically. The peekaboo system, which is into the firefighting lift, the lift doors are on a constant pressure, so you inch the doors open so you can assess the risk from the lift. These are all self-contained within the lift design, but it goes to the intermediate emergency doors for floor to floor. So if you've got a distance of 7 meters or greater within the lift shaft, then you have to have an intermediate door so you can see the progress of the fire, the IP protection of electrical switches, and rescue facilities in the lift car. So not just for rescuing people that may have been trapped, the firefighters may get trapped, and that's a key element on the code as well. So that's in the new lift design, but in the modernization, so if you're in an existing building, so modernization or replacing lifts in existing buildings is a little bit more complex. So the elements with you would look at negotiating with your local fire and rescue service and building control, what elements of the building work that you can reasonably deploy within the design, and that's covered under BS 8899, which is the improvement of firefighting and evacuation lifts. So next slide, please. So evacuation lifts. So as I stated earlier, then it's very similar in its design in terms you have to move the water about. You have to have the provision of secondary power supplies. Protected safe areas are particularly key. The compartmentation is particularly key in evacuation lifts. Again, this is a draft paper that is out for review currently, but we're currently working with a client which is in the NHS and university hospitals, where we're looking at the design for around about 10 evacuation lifts in existing builds. And you've got to overcome especially in the fabric of the building, where some of those buildings are listed and what you can do with the main lobby entrances and atriums and all of that. So we've deployed our architectural team to resolve that, because we're simple folk just dealing with the lifts. So if we move to the next slide. So the evacuation lifts in terms of the lift requirements, again, it comes to a secondary source of power. But this secondary source of power is within the lift. So you'll have a primary and secondary source of power into your machine room, which is separated power consumption with a changeover switch. But in an evacuation lift, you have to have a battery backup, which is normally through a UPS that allows a 30-minute duration, so you can move people if you lose both feeds of power, so you can move people through the floors to get them out of the building. Emergency trapdoor in the lift car, again, if you lose the power, you can get people out of the lift car. Again, the doors function in safe area landings only, compartmentation, various visual and audible indications and annunciations in the lift car. If there's a smoke-filled building, you have to provide that immediate pictogram that people can see where the lifts are, and remote evacuations where appropriate. So this is all linked to the evacuation strategy that you would have within the building, and that's when the evacuation lifts will be deployed or designed. And again, through negotiation with your fire and rescue services and with your building control people. And the next slide is really just a Q&A.
Okay, thanks very much, John. That was most informative. We've got one specific question to you, and then there's another question that's come in that slightly off. Well, he's completely off topic, but whether or not you know the answer or not, we'll try and be helpful. So, the specific question was: do all lifts need to be brought up to EN 8172?
Existence. So there is a different code. So there is a EN 8180, which is the safety norms for existing lifts. So slightly different. So there's one for escalators as well. So, but safety norms for existing lifts covers what you would see in 8180 and 8176. It covers it bridges the gap. So how you would modernize an existing lift and bring it up to code. So that's covered in EN 8180.
Okay, and again, I'll come back to the off-topic question in a minute, because there's one other question that's come in, and again, it's just for clarification, really. Are firefighting and evacuation lifts in addition to the regular lifts?
Yes.
So well,
if your building is over 18 meters, so you have your fire service access level, which doesn't have to be ground floor. It could be a deck access area or a mezzanine floor. But where your designated fire service access level is 10 meters, if you're 18 meters above that level or 10 meters below, then you need to have a firefighting lift. The evacuation lift is by consultation with your evacuation strategy for the building. Now, if you've got more than one lift in the building, you only need one lift to be firefighting. And similarly, evacuation, but it has to be designated and serve all floors. So some of the projects we're currently working on, we have group systems where we'll take one of the lift out of the group. Well, it will stay in the group, but when the changeover switch, when it's turned into firefight mode, it comes out of the group and it stays in isolation because it becomes the bridgehead for the firefighters or the designated lift for evacuation. If that's clear.
Well, let me just plead my sort of ignorance on behalf of the audience. So in terms of if you've got a building with only one lift shaft, yeah. So it's got a normal, what I would describe as a normal lift, passenger lift, and so on. Are we then saying that in the event of a fire, it has to turn into a firefighting or evacuation lift for the purpose of the fire, or are they now saying that, if you like, you need a second lift shaft with a second lift?
If again it comes to the height of the building,
right?
So if it's 18 meters above or 10 meters below fire service access level, and there's one lift, it has to be firefighting.
Right.
If it's below that, then it doesn't have to be.
Right. Okay.
But again, local fire authorities are taking a different view, and local building control people are taking a different view. So when we see the new building regulations come out, it may change.
Right.
But currently, a single lift is fine, as long as the building is not more than 18 meters high, or you've got it below floor level 10 meters.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
I think it does.
Okay.
So, just in terms of if you're required to have, we've answered. I think we've sort of answered that. I have a design which has 4 lifts. One side of the building is 6 stories, and the other side is 4 stories. I want to reduce number of lifts to make both firefighting lifts. Is this allowed?
Yes.
Excellent. That's very good.
You're improving the safety of the building. So
right.
As long as you're not detracting from the safety of the building, then yes, you are.
Yeah. Right. Okay. And again, I think you've answered this already. So a firefighting lift can be used by non-firefighting operatives in terms of, i.e. regular building occupiers, unless obviously there's a fire.
Unless
Okay.
so the fireman takes control. So the process is, in the event of a fire, the fire officer, the lead fire officer, takes control on fire service access level. Jim will probably show you in his presentation the hardware that they use that takes, it's a changeover switch, just takes control of the lift, and then that acts as the bridgehead for the firefighters.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. So I think that's a good segue into Jim's presentation. We will, just for the benefit of the audience, we do keep a note of all the questions, and I think one of the things we will do is ask our panel when we're sort of off mic, so to speak, just to look through them, and we'll come up with a comprehensive answers to your questions. But please do keep them coming in. So Jim, I'll move the slides forward for you. So welcome, and let's have your presentation, please.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to John as well. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jim Scrivens, and I'll be presenting to you some information about firefighter lifts, and there's a bit about evacuation lifts too. The first slide is the corporate logo of the company. Can we just go back to that one, Andrew, please?
Sorry. I'll beg your pardon.
Yeah, the first slide is the corporate logo of the company that I represent, Tritton Engineering Services Limited. And I've been employed by LES for more than 20 years. I've probably a lot more than 20 years, actually. And my current post is engineering manager. Okay, Andrew, thanks. This is a little bit about Tritton Engineering Services. We're a small to medium employer with head office and 2 satellite offices. Our market is mainly refurbishment of lifts in local housing authority buildings. However, we also do a lot of private projects as well. We install new lifts as well as refurbishing older ones, and have a busy service department which maintains many thousands of lifts and EDA equipment, etc., etc. We also have a factory where we manufacture lifts to bespoke applications, to suit bespoke applications, or from 3D drawings from our design team. Next one. This slide I've stole from John, but don't tell him. I don't think he's noticed. This is the construction plan for replacement of lifts. We come in at position 3, and then the steps are on there. I can't actually see them on my view, to be honest. But we take over there and work with the client right the way through to the handover. Next one, please, Andrew. We currently have projects involving firefighter lifts for London City Hall and Ealing Borough Council. We're also in talks with Ealing, so that we make sure we interpret their requirements correctly. And there's at least 2 firefighter lifts on that project. Next one, please, Andrew. Right, description of a firefighter lift. A firefighter lift is that provided within a multi-storey building, a complex building, or a building with deep basements. The purpose of a firefighter lift is to provide facility to assist firefighters to move more easily vertically through the building. General considerations are not just the lift car itself. It involves the motor room, the shaft, the wiring, as John went through earlier, waterproofing, etc., etc. Andrew, next slide, please. Right, when the firefighters enter a building, they'll be looking for clues as to which lift, and these are 3 different types of switches with which they can switch the lift into firefighter mode. Okay, Andrew, thanks. This is an intercom system consisting of the control unit. There's two different types of car units here, one of which has indicator lights on to tell you whether or not you're on main power supply or backup power supply. The other one doesn't have the indicator. And then the fourth one is the landing unit that's used at the bridgehead. This diagram is taken from BSE and 8172 and represents a firefighter self-rescuing himself if he's using the lift in firefighter mode and it breaks down. So he's had to open the trapdoor and use a ladder to get out of the lift, which will get him to the next landing through which he will escape. Next one, Andrew, please. Difficulties in our market. There are many difficulties. Buildings that are too old to comply with modern standards. But as John mentioned earlier, we have BS 8999, which gives us a little bit of sympathy there. Infrastructure that was not designed to accommodate firefighter lifts. Water management systems that do not extend to the lifts and lift shafts. There's also, as John mentioned earlier, a requirement for a secondary or alternative power supply for a firefighter lift. If you haven't got fire-safe compartments outside of the lift, the shaft may need to be air pressurised in order to keep the smoke and fumes out. And also, lifts often serve odd-numbered floors and even-numbered floors, which may mean new entrances have to be formed to make them serve all floors. Andrew, next one, please. Hello, Andrew. Can you hear me?
Yep, yep.
There you go.
Is that the right slide?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
How we look to overcome the difficulties. There are lots of different solutions. I don't know whether you can see that on your screens, yeah. But I've got a slow network connection warning.
We can't. Okay.
Okay, so it's our network then. I've just got rid of that anyway. There's lots of solutions. They're all the different ones for each building. Some of the same difficulties have different solutions in different buildings. But we get there through experience and a lot of qualified people who really care about the job. So, you know, we get there in the end. Okay, Andrew. An alternative consideration is an evacuation lift. The evacuation lift is one that complies with BSE and 8176. There's no definitive compliance test for this standard at the moment, but it's in review because the existing standard was issued in 2011, and there's a draft out at the moment for a new one, BSE and 8176 2019, and when that arrives, BS 8486 Part 10 will be the test for it, intended for future publication. Okay, Andrew. Right, the differences between firefighter lift and evacuation lift. Firefighter lift description. The fire service have exclusive use of the lift for carrying firefighters and equipment to the required floor. Firefighter lifts are required where a housing building has put housing building in there, it's any building, has a floor more than 18 metres above or 10 metres below the fire service access level. Features emergency lift operation via interface between lift control and fire detection stroke alarm system with emergency intercom system. Trapdoors and ladders, etc. for rescue operations, as we saw earlier in the slide with the diagram of the firefighter rescuing himself. Okay, and both shaft and car electrical components protected from water. Secondary or alternative power supply to the lift to allow the lift to remain in service. And the lifts are typically 8 to 13 person passenger goods lifts. For an evacuation lift, this enables assisted use of the lift following an evacuation strategy by persons with disabilities. This means that it's not just the people who need to use the lift. You have to have people assisting them, and you have to have an intercom system similar to the firefighting intercom system, but you need a station on each of the floors that the lift serves as well. Features emergency lift operation via interface between lift control and fire detection alarm system in support of the evacuation management strategy with emergency intercom system. Again, secondary or alternative power supply to allow the lift to remain in service during evacuation. And there must be trained designated staff to carry out the evacuation strategy. Next one, Andrew. Lift sizes from 8 persons, but usually larger in order to carry beds and stretchers. Okay, Andrew. LES have in the past done a hybrid of this specification where we make a firefighter lift and an evacuation lift in one, so that the lift can be used in evacuation mode until the firefighters arrive and take over the use of the lift for fighting fires. Some features of the firefighting lift and the evacuation lifts are the same, therefore the two specifications can be achieved in one lift installation. In summary, local authorities and other lift owners are practicing due diligence in regard of the safety of building occupiers and users. And for lifts, this is a case of firefighter lifts and or evacuation lifts. More and more, we are being asked to provide conformity with the supplementary standards that will allow these lifts to be used as such. Each building lift presents different challenges along the same theme. Therefore, we have the solutions required in order to achieve the requirements.
Excellent.
Questions?
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, we've had lots and lots of questions. So that really good news. As I said before, if I don't answer or ask the panel to deal with your specific question, we will, as I said, we are keeping a note of them, and we will ask Jim and John to come back to us with answers. So I'm just working. There are a number of questions that are quite similar, and that's about the emergence, about the secondary power supply. And a number of questions like, how often does that need to be tested? Can it be solar panels on the roof? Does it need or would it need a second substation? What are the discussions then about local power supplies and so on? So again, there are sort of quite a number of questions around that secondary supply, and wonder if you could try and answer that.
Okay, so
Carry on, John.
Sorry, Jim. So in terms of that, so we've got a number of projects currently underway, but we've just completed a series of projects for the Department of Work and Pensions, and we do a black test. So in terms of the test the integrity of the firefighting or the evacuation lift and the dual power supply, you do a blackout test. So but that is a periodic test. Now, the frequency of which is dependent upon your maintenance regime and your maintenance provider for electrical services. I'm not entirely sure what the code says on that periodicity, to be frank. But clearly, we've done it biannually, so every 6 months. Or we facilitated that test every 6 months. The test or the examination for conformity for firefighting lifts in operation is annual. So I think there's a different code behind the power supply. In terms of solar power, I don't believe that's an option. It has to be a dedicated and integrated support system. And yes, by substation.
Okay, anything to add to that, Jim?
Yeah, the backup supply could be a generator. That's activated by the loss of supply. So the loss of supply triggers a changeover control system that automatically fires the generator. It could be. And for evacuation lifts, you can also use energy
UPS.
Okay, and forgive my ignorance on it, because I don't fully understand what the letters mean.
So UPS, uninterruptible power supply. So you can for evacuation, you can use UPS.
Right.
But that's if you recall back to the slides I showed, it that gives you a 30-minute. Part of the code is you have to provide 30-minute by battery backup, basically.
Right. Okay. And the fact that the lifts are computer controlled, a power outage may corrupt and render the lift inoperable. Again, how does that affect their usage?
The lift has to return to service within 30 seconds of the changeover. Now, it's allowed if the control system loses the position of the lift, it's allowed to move one floor to regain its position, but then it's got to be able to carry on working as it was.
Right. And most lift installations will have surge protection anyway.
Right. Okay.
And that's part of that annual test. So you would test that changeover. So in the event of a power surge, you'd be able to test the drive that controls the lift, and it shouldn't. The software and CPUs and boards are all should be ISO-optolated to code. So they're protected against power surge too.
Okay. In terms of in the case of evacuation, can only firefighters use a lift, or could trained staff also be able to evacuate using an evacuation or firefighting lift, or are they purely for the use of firefighters?
No, as an evacuation lift, the building needs to have an evacuation strategy, which includes nominated evacuation staff. And then if it's both firefighter and evacuation lift, when the firefighters turn up, they take over and use the lift for whatever purposes they see fit.
Okay. Then one other question, but the start trigger for the lift must be on the lift supply or the boards on the essential or on the S and tail services. Does that make sense to you guys?
Sorry, could you say it again?
The start trigger for the lift must be on the lift supply and or the boards on the, and I'm not quite sure the spelling's right. It's either essential services or is actually how it is ESSEN tail services. Forgive my ignorance if I've answered that. Essential, yeah.
I would say that's essential, but I don't quite understand the question.
All right. Okay.
It's the changeover switch, Jim. So when you lose power, on what side? It's actually on. It's not on the lift side. It's on the power side. So the changeover switch. So when we the demarcation for lift operation is from the main supply.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. Well, as I said, I don't think I've just done a pure justice to all of those questions, and thank you, audience, for sending them in. But I will ask Jim and John to go through all of those questions in detail offline, and we'll send the answers out to you all. I'm conscious of time, and I'm now going to move on to our third speaker, who's been waiting patiently. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to talk briefly about procurement process for lifts. And the process is the same when procuring any lift, a normal lift or a firefighting lift. I imagine that there may be time constraints. It might take a little bit longer with the extra design and extra technical input. So I'll talk today about the procurement options, contract options when you've chosen a supplier, and briefly touch on stage payments at the end. Next slide, please, Andrew. So with lift upgrade and installation, Fusion21's view of best practice is to appoint a consultant. Now, a lot of our members with the lift portfolio will already have a retained consultant, but if not, we can help with a direct award from Lot 5 of the new list framework. So a consultant will help you develop your requirements for a lift, firefighting lift, evacuation lift, a suite of lifts, depending on the complexity of the lift and the site. What I would suggest is do a little bit of research, look at any records you have before you start the process, because preparation's key. There's nothing worse than getting to site and finding something that you didn't know about, such as the first thread you take up from stepping in the lift car's got asbestos under it, or you've got to deepen the lift pit and there's a service shaft beneath that. So once we've got a specification, depending on the member's specific requirements, we would send the documents out to further competition for pricing. Maybe if your requirements are really urgent, such as your lift's not working, or you know it's only got a few months to the end of its useful life, you may wish to direct award. For a supplier from Lot 3, or the suppliers from Lot 3 invited to tender or visit site, cost the works and submit via competition, or if it was a direct award, we've got the option of the prime cost and contract fee. Once you've selected a supplier, it's time to issue contract based on the selected form of contract, which I'll talk about later on. Next slide, please, Andrew. So contract options on the Fusion21 framework. For a direct award, as I mentioned, we have the JCT prime cost building contract, and we have percentages submitted by suppliers when they bid to join the framework. If you were going down the further competition route, we've previously used JCT minor works contracts or intermediate building contracts, but other options are available through the framework. There's the layer conditions of contract or any bespoke form of agreement that your organisation wishes to use, as long as we let the bidders have sight of it at tender. Next slide, please, Andrew. So finally, I just want to touch on stage payments because they do differ slightly to normal contracts. We commonly use terms that mirror the LEA conditions of contract, which is stage payments, 30% on contract award. So your supplier then does the final measuring and design for the lift and orders it from the manufacturer. 30% when the lift delivered and the works commence. And this is quite a substantial amount that a member has to pay upfront when the lift's not actually been fitted. And then the rest by monthly interim valuations as per normal. The remaining, we usually suggest the LEA bond as opposed to traditional retention. The lift contractors are happy with this. And if something did go wrong, LEA, the Lift and Escalator Industry Association, will arrange to have the works completed. Thank you. I noticed
yeah, Peter, just one question in relation to that's come through. Do contracts include for contractors' design?
They can do, yeah. We can do that, but as I say, with the best practice slide, we always suggest that you get a consultant in, you get a design for close protocol equipment, but we can do contractors' design specifically if there's a rush or a need and you've got residents that can't use a list because it's out of service.
Okay, thanks very much. I've got two final questions because again, conscious of time, and I suppose this is probably generated at John and Jim, but we haven't touched on costs. So, what are the additional costs of installing firefighting as opposed to evacuation as opposed to normal lifts? What's the difference in price?
Well, there are two elements to consider. One is at what degree you would go on the construction, on the changing the building fabric, so the introduction of the drainage, the IP regs, whether you need a secondary power supply. The lift piece is fairly straightforward. You're probably looking about 20% increase in price. Jim's raising his hand there. From
my office.
Oh, from what we see, 20% is probably top end. So when you're designing, when we're taking projects out for tender on a competitive basis, the main control system remains the same. It's the fire service access, bridge heading equipment, the lift car construction. Generally, entrances are 2-hour fire rated as standard now. So that failure on Grenfell on the fire rated doors, which is part of that phase 2 review. 20% is by rule of thumb.
Okay, Jim, anything to add to that?
Only that it's going to be different for individual lifts because you're going to have more work to do on a lift that serves more floors, so, but I mean, 20% is
okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. And finally, and again, I'll ask all three of you this question that's coming. If you had one piece of advice for any of our members or anyone listening this afternoon thinking about procuring or installing a firefighting or evacuation lift, what would it be? Peter, do you want to start with that?
Well, yes, preparation and research before you start, and even down to section 20 for leaseholders, you need to have that in mind right from the start.
Okay, Jim?
Well, we've done a few and been quite successful at it. However, it's a big undertaking. You know, it's not something to take lightly. You need to consider all of the options.
Yeah,
Okay,
for me,
John?
it would be don't underestimate the time frame, and really consider the wider environment, not just the lift piece, but the building fabric.
And if you were in charge on a day-to-day basis in terms of tall buildings, would you make sure that they're in, or would you retrofit them if an existing lift wasn't up to that standard? I'll go back to you, John.
Clearly, it's within, well, if I was responsible for lifts in a building and seeing the new regulations and the regulatory authority is going to have teeth, I'd be beating a path to a lift consultant around about now.
Yeah. And Jim?
Yes, indeed, 100%.
Right.
We have to think of safety, especially in view of what happened at Grenfell Tower.
Yeah. Okay. That's brilliant. There's one sort of final question. Can RPS warrant a design? Oh, I've just lost it on my screen. Can warrant a design that comprehensively addresses all fire-related matters, lifts, sprinklers, compartmentation, strategy, etc.? That's probably a planted question, is it, John?
It sounds like it. Well, we are multidisciplinary. We're currently working with a number of clients, but one in particular where we are providing architectural, M&E, and lifts for just that purpose.
Yeah, excellent, brilliant. Well, it's been a really, really great session. The volume of questions and the interest that you, the audience, have shown has been brilliant. I'll on your behalf give an actual round of applause to Jim, to John, and to Peter for their input. It's been really, really enlightening. Apologies for some of my daft questions and interjections, but anyway, that's the role as me as chair. It really has been a great session. I will get the questions to Jim and John and to Peter, and we will get back to you to answer all of those questions. So finally, from me, thank you very much for listening. We are continuing, as I said at the beginning, this series of webinars, and we have one on self-testing emergency lighting, which will be in 2 weeks time. So watch your emails for an invitation to that. Thank you again for attending. Thank you to all of our speakers on your behalf, and as always, stay safe, and if hopefully it is like it where you are, enjoy the sunshine. Thanks and good afternoon.
Cheers.
Thank you.